Good evening, friends, fiends, and night owl supremes. Welcome back to A Bit Late. I hope your day is going alright, or your evening, or your night, or your sleep, or what have you. Things are okay here, just, keeping on, and that's okay for some days. Tonight we are reading the infamous Sun, Moon, and Talia by Giambattista Basile, which I did cover on the main A Bit Frank channel in the Sleeping Beauty Origins video. It gets dark and grim. Actually, it's way more grim than the Brothers Grimm's version of Sleeping Beauty, if you can believe it. And even more grim than the Perrault's version, which has an ogress in it. Yeah, this one just gets really into the dark nature of humans. You'll see what I mean. But without any further ado, I present to you Giambattista Basile's Sun, Moon, and Talia. It is a well-known fact that the cruel man is generally his own hangman, and he who throws stones at heaven frequently comes off with a broken head, as you do. But the reverse of the medal shows us that innocence is a shield of fig tree wood, upon which the sword of malice is broken or blunts its point, so that when a poor man fancies himself already dead and buried, he revives again in bone and flesh, as you shall hear in the story which I am going to draw from the cask of memory with the tap of my tongue. How's that for stuff? That's some really backdated ASMR terminology. I'm kidding, I joke of course, even though this story does predate both Grimm and Perrault. And I don't know if that moral at the beginning of the story exactly reflects what happens in the story, so simply as you'll see. Once there was a great lord who, having a daughter born to him named Talia, commanded the seers and wise men of his kingdom to come and tell him her fortune. And after various counselings, they came to the conclusion that a great peril awaited her from a piece of stalk in some flax. Very common. Thereupon he issued a command prohibiting any flax or hemp or such like thing to be brought into his house, hoping thus to avoid the danger. Man, Fairytale 101, you cannot get rid of flax. You need it for everything. When will they learn? When Talia was grown up and was standing one day at the window, she saw an old woman pass by who was spinning. Of course she did. She had never seen a distaff or a spindle, and being vastly pleased with the twisting and twirling of the thread, her curiosity was so great that she made the old woman come upstairs. Then, taking the distaff in her hand, Talia began to draw out the thread, when, by mischance, a piece of stalk in the flax getting under her fingernail, she fell dead upon the ground. From something under her fingernail, dear friends and fiends, I might remind you. At which sight the old woman hobbled downstairs as quickly as she could. That's kind of a funny visual, just hobbling down the stairs. I wore a little bootie for my ankle one time, and hobbling down the stairs was not easy, and I was not an old woman. But seriously, I ask you, dead from a piece of flax. It does not say she was unconscious, or she lost blood, or she just passed out and fainted in fashion. No, she is dead. Now, when the unhappy father heard of the disaster that had befallen Talia, after weeping bitterly, he placed her in that palace in the country upon a velvet seat under a canopy of brocade, and fastening the doors, he quitted forever the place which had been the cause of such misfortune to him, in order to drive all remembrance of it from his mind. Oh, poor man. He's not the one that died. I am not saying that losing a child is easy, but it is interesting that he sets her up on a chair that's really pretty in fabric and just leaves her there unattended. I mean, she is dead. We've been told many times. She's just sort of sitting, waiting, probably literally sitting pretty. Now, a certain king, of course, happened to one day go to the chase, and a falcon escaping from him flew in at the window of that palace. When the king found that that bird did not return at his call, he ordered his attendants to knock at the door, thinking that the palace was inhabited. And after knocking for some time, the king ordered them to fetch a vine dresser's ladder, wishing himself to scale the house and see what was inside. Curiosity is gonna kill the king? Not quite. Then he mounted the ladder, and going through the whole palace, he stood aghast at not finding any living person. At last he came to the room where Talia was lying as if enchanted. Oh, now she's enchanted. And when the king saw her, he called to her, thinking that she was asleep. but in vain, for still she slept on, however loud he called. Now, is this sleeping from his perspective because he, wants to get a little something? Or is she dead? And we don't know how long she's been dead for, so this is not a pretty picture however you spin it. So, after admiring her beauty a while, that's how the kids are saying it these days, the king returned home to his kingdom, where for a long time he forgot all that had happened. Lucky him. Also, in more recent translations of this tale, they are more, well, I wouldn't say graphic, but more forthcoming with information as to what is involved in admiring her beauty. And in the next paragraph, you'll see what I mean by that. It's just not right. It's not okay. Consent is not had. Just so you know, just throwing that out there. Meanwhile, two little twins, see, one a boy and the other a girl, see, who looked like two little jewels, wandered from I know not where, really, narrator, you're very unreliable, we know from where, into the palace and found Talia in a trance. Wow, this version is skipping over all of the naughty stuff. Maybe that's a good thing. At first, they were afraid because they tried in vain to awaken her. But becoming bolder, the girl gently took Talia's finger into her mouth to bite it and wake her by this means. And so it happened that the splinter of flax came out. Thereupon she seemed to awake as from a deep sleep. And when she saw those little jewels at her side, she took them to her heart and loved them more than her own life. But she wondered greatly at seeing herself quite alone in the palace with two children. I mean, I'm sure she would, regardless of what admiring beauty means, and food and refreshment brought to her by unseen hands. It's always those unseen hands. After a time, the king, calling Talia to mind, so he remembered what he did, took occasion one day when he went to the chase to go and see her, and when he found her awakened with two beautiful little creatures by her side, he was struck dumb with rapture. Then the king told Talia who he was, and they formed a great league and friendship, and he remained there for several days, promising as he took leave to return and fetch her. And again, in the more recent translations that look at the dialects and such of the original tales, this is way more detailed and graphic, and if you're interested, you can check that out. When the king went back to his own kingdom, he was forever repeating the names of Talia and the little ones. Insomuch that when he was eating, he had Talia in his mouth. Ugh. Also a little bit of foreshadowing. And sun and moon, for so he named the children. So fun fact, in Perrault's version, those are also the name of the children, but in French, it's aurora or dawn and jour or day. So kind of derived from this, absolutely. We don't get that in the Disney version. It just sort of skips off before all the juicy details. Anyway, that was a tangent, friends and fiends. So he has Talia in his mouth and sun and moon, for so he named the children. Nay, even when he went to rest, did he not leave off calling on them, for one and then the others? Now the king's stepmother had grown suspicious at his long absence at the chase. Oh, they even have it as his stepmother, not his wife. Yes, in the more recent versions, it's his freaking wife. But this is an old children's book, so I guess I kind of understand. And when she heard him calling thus on Talia, sun and moon, she waxed wroth and said to the king's secretary, "Hark ye, friend, you stand in great danger between the axe and the block. Tell me who it is that my stepson is enamored of, and I will make you rich. But if you conceal the truth from me, I'll make you rue it." Now in the book, if it's her husband, she's much more justified in getting to the bottom of this. The man moved on the one side by fear, and on the other pricked by interest, which is the bandage to the eyes of honor, the blind of justice, and an old horseshoe to trip up good faith. There's the descriptions I've been missing. Told the queen the whole truth, whereupon she sent the secretary in the king's name to Talia, saying that he wished to see the children. Then Talia sent them with great joy, but the queen commanded the cook to kill them and serve them up in various ways for her wretched stepson to eat. And that's a very, very common thing for jealous women or wives or people to do in old myths or fairy tales. So he really will have Sun, Moon, and Talia in his mouth. Although he could have had her in his mouth. Anyway, sorry. Wow, that got off a little weird. Now the cook, who had a tender heart, seeing the two pretty little golden pinnons, took compassion on them and gave them to his wife, bidding her keep them concealed. Then he killed and dressed two little kids, these are goats, in 100 different ways. When the king came, the queen quickly ordered all the dishes be served up, and the king fell to eating with great delight, exclaiming, "How good this is! Oh, how excellent by the soul of my grandfather!" And the old queen all the while kept saying, "Eat away, for you know what you eat." At first the king paid no attention to what she said, but at last, hearing the music continue, he replied, I know well enough what I eat, for you brought nothing to the house." So, yes, this definitely is talking about his wife, because he just then insults her for her lack of fertility, and that stays in the modern tellings, and it makes a lot more sense in the modern tellings, just saying. At last, getting up in a rage, he went off to the villa at a little distance to cool his anger. Meanwhile, the queen, not satisfied with what she had done, called the secretary again and sent him to fetch Talia, pretending that the king wished to see her. At this summons, Talia went that very instant. How does she know where it is? She's been trapped in a house as though dead for who knows how long, never leaving. Anyway, she leaves that very instant, longing to see the light of her eyes, and not knowing that only smoke awaited her. But when she came before the queen, the latter said to her with the face of an arrow, and full of poison as a viper, "Welcome, madame sly cheat. Are you indeed the pretty mischief maker? Are you the weed that has caught my son's eye and given me all this trouble?" And I know I keep talking about the news stories, but wow, are they worse in these descriptions. When Talia heard this, she began to excuse herself, but the queen would not listen to a word. And having a large fire lighted in the courtyard, she commanded that Talia should be thrown into the flames. No! Poor Talia, seeing matters come to a bad pass, fell on her knees before the queen and besought her to at least grant her time to take the clothes from off her back. Good Talia, buying time. Whereupon the queen, not so much out of pity for the unhappy girl as to possess the dress herself, which was embroidered all over with gold and pearls, said to herself, "Undress yourself, I allow you." Then Talia began to undress, and as she took off each garment, she uttered an exclamation of grief. And when she had stripped off her cloak, her gown, and her jacket, and was proceeding to take off her petticoat, they seized her and were dragging her away. At that moment the king came up, and seeing the spectacle, he demanded to know the whole truth. And when he asked also for the children and heard that his stepmother had ordered them to be killed, the unhappy king gave himself up to despair. He also theoretically ate them. As far as he knows, that would be way more than despair, right? He then ordered her to be thrown into the same fire which had been lighted for Talia, and the secretary with her, who was the handle of this cruel game and the weaver of this wicked web. Then he was going to do the same with the cook, thinking that he had killed the children, but the cook threw himself at the king's feet and said, "Truly, Sir King, I would desire no other sinecure in return for the service I have done to you than to be thrown into the furnace full of live coals. I would ask no other gratuity than the thrust of a spike. I would wish for no other amusement than to be roasted in the fire. I would desire no other privilege than to have the ashes of the cook mingled with those of a queen." Wow, he's laying thick on the humility, right? "But I look for no such great reward for having saved the children and brought them back to you in spite of that wicked creature who wished to kill them." When the king heard these words, he was quite beside himself. He appeared to dream and could not believe what his ears had heard. Then he said to the cook, "If it is true that you have saved the children, be assured that I will take you from turning the spits and reward you so that you shall call yourself the happiest man in the world." As the king was speaking these words, the wife of the cook, seeing the dilemma her husband was in, brought sun and moon before the king, who, playing at the game of three with Talia and the other children, went round and round, kissing first one then another. Then, giving the cook a large reward, he made him his chamberlain, and he took Talia to wife, who enjoyed a long life with her husband and the children. Acknowledging that, quote, "He who has luck may go to bed, and bliss will rain down upon his head. Happily ever after." The end. Wow, and I don't know if we can actually call that a happily ever after, reading between the very obviously redacted lines of this fairy tale. I don't know if it was a very happy ending for anyone involved, actually. Maybe kids. They lived, and obviously the king got what he wanted all around. But I do find it interesting that these were written back in the day for both adults and children. I've been doing quite a bit of reading on that. Crazy, right? But anyway, I do hope you enjoyed tonight's telling of Sun, Moon, and Talia. I definitely enjoyed reading it to you and hanging out. If you'd like to see more stories like this, do be sure to click the Fairytale playlist. And for a more in-depth analysis on Sun, Moon, and Talia and Sleeping Beauty fairy tales, check out The Creepy Origins of Sleeping Beauty on A Bit Frank. Now off to sleep and dream what you will, or stay a while and enjoy another tale. Whichever you choose, I'll speak to you again. And until then, sweet dreams, my friend. Good night.